Alright, so I'm going to start modelling this form in the foreground here and just go through some of these options you have for Booleans. So I'm going to make sort of a canopy that has some openings in it. And so I'll start just with a simple box that's going to represent a wall. So I'm just going to make that shape, bring it up, and so you can see there my box shape in the foreground. I'll just pan the view a little bit so I can see that a bit better. And to make it have a reason to be done in 3ds Max, I'm still going to deform it a little bit. And so I'll straight away convert that to an editable poly, and then go in and change some of the vertices around. Now, when you see this happen, it's sometimes going to disappear. There we go, that's brought it back. Just got to do a bit of zooming and wake it up. But there we are, so you can see it in the orthographic view there, and I can just select some of these vertices and adjust them so that I've got a deformed shape. And then a really useful option, if you just want to see the thing you're working on, is to right click and then go to isolate selection. So that'll hide everything else. And then another handy shortcut is P on the keyboard, which will set a view to be perspective, which means that it's not tied to the camera anymore. So it'll make it easy for me to zoom and pan and look at this object. I'm also going to do a zoom extents and just orbit around so I can see that a bit better. Okay, so I've got my basic wall shape, and now I want to make an opening in that wall, which could later on have a door. So I'm going to make another box, and I'll just click and drag in the top view and make sure it's intersecting my first shape. Over in the command panel, in the create panel, I can change the size there. Good habit is to force yourself to go into the modify tab to do that, because it'll go from the create panel before long, but if you go into the modify panel you'll always have those properties there. So I can fine tune the size there. It doesn't need to be definite, because you can still adjust that after you've created the Boolean. And I'm going to leave it at the moment with it's just over a metre, which is nowhere near high enough for a door opening, but I know I can come back and change that just to give you something as an example. So I've got my two shapes. So now I'm going to go back to the first one, and then again on the create panel, under geometry, if you go to the drop down list and go to compound objects, you'll find Pro Boolean. And it's one of those terms people often think it's not that important because it's got such a strange name, and you couldn't be more wrong if you're not realising this is one of the most important tools in any 3D program or in any computer program. Have any of you heard of Booleans before?
Yeah, I've heard of Booleans.
Yeah, you might have if you've done any computing. It's if in programming. It is. It is exactly. They're all related. It's originally a mathematical term. It's named after a guy called George Boole, who's a 19th century mathematician, and it's to do with logic and a way of defining things with algebra. So it's crept its way into all sorts of computing. It's actually used mainly in programming, but also lots of CAD and 3D operations use this term as well. And it's used whenever you need to combine objects in specific ways. And so you'll see when you go to Pro Boolean, you then have the main options that are associated with Boolean modelling in 3D programs: union, intersection and subtraction. So you've probably seen these in AutoCAD. Union and subtraction would have been things you would have done, and then intersection might have been one you'd seen but maybe hadn't known any uses for it. I'll give you some examples though with intersection. But they're all really useful options. And then in 3ds Max you have these extra things like merge and attach and so on, which are useful as well. Okay, so subtraction is probably the main one. Subtraction is a lot like void. And so void in Revit. Okay, so with that option selected, I'm going to go to start picking and then choose my box, and it'll take that away. Now it's still on start picking, so I'm going to right click to finish that. And on the modify panel you'll see it's turned that off. And so one big advantage with, that you have with Booleans in Max over a program like Revit is that you can combine as many objects as you like and control the way they operate in the Boolean. So I'll go and make another box, and in the I'll do it in the top viewport. So I'm just going to make this something like that. And so I might want that to combine with the original shape rather than subtract from it. So I can select this object, back to the modify panel now, and I've got this option to again start picking. But first I'm going to select union, and then again start picking, and now choose my new shape, and it's going to combine it with the original objects rather than subtracting it.
What does intersection mean as a point of difference?
Oh yeah, sure. So I'll just I'll do one. I'm going to do some more later, which are probably better examples of intersection. But just to give you an idea, if I do something over here, I'll do just another box that's intersecting with part of this shape. So it's just that right-hand side that this box intersects with. So now if I choose the original again, set it to intersection, start picking, and then choose my new shape, it's going to just leave where they overlap. Which for an object like this isn't going to be all that useful, but later on you'll see there are lots of good uses for it. So I'll get rid of that one. But a good use of union is when you want to add detail to objects. So say if I wanted to make this look like a space age sort of wall with lots of different panels and all sorts of detail. A good trick when you're making things like boxes is to turn on auto grid, and that way you can create things on a surface without having to set a UCS or anything like that, or a custom grid like you would in AutoCAD. So I can add in all these extra little things, make them all different shapes. Okay, so then I'll just move that up a little bit. Oops, so go back. I won't do that one. Let's do a new one. Okay, so I want that to be all one object now. So again, back to the original, and then start picking, make sure it's on union, and just go and pick away. And then
every time you make a shape, you right clicking. Finish it, or
to create the shapes in the first place, or
every time you finish it in one shape?
oh yeah, no, I'm just leaving it on start picking, and then I'm just clicking on each one. And then it stays on start picking until you either click on that button again or right click, and that'll turn it off. Right, so then I might want to adjust this original object now to make it a bit higher, and give me the the height I need to make this opening a decent size. So what you'll find with Booleans in Max, as opposed to a lot of other programs, is you can easily go back to any object in the stack. And you see that's down the bottom here. I can go back to the original shape, and there you can see now it's showing me the editable poly. I can choose the original polygons and just keep editing them and doing things like extrude and all the other things you can do normally.
So now you're only editing the original polygons.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. and then back to the top, and I can find the box. You can see it tells me this is the subtracted box, and then again it'll show me the box there, and I can change its height. Before it was only a bit over a metre. Now I can just bring that up and it'll adjust within that shape. Yes, sir.
What would happen if you wanted to edit that whole thing as a group, bring it all up? You would just press the final select.
Oh, you can still scale the whole thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. So I can go and just go to scale, and I can, if you wanted to just change the height without making it change in plan, stretch it along the Z-axis, and that will scale it up and down, and that works really well.
So you're not selecting number 8 there, you're just selecting
The whole thing, yeah, yeah.
If you select number 8, would that just be the last object that you did?
Yeah, well, you'd have to select it here,
Yeah.
and then choose what you want up there.
Yeah. And then when you edit it now,
Well, scale, that's still going to work on the whole object. I can change the properties here,
oh, okay.
but to scale it, there's another thing you have to go into the operands here. That's an extra step, and then you can scale it. So there, that's just going to scale that one. Yeah. So yeah, I know that one's a bit counterintuitive though. So yeah, union and subtraction though are still probably the main operations you'll use with Booleans. But just to give you some examples of maybe using intersection. Say if I've got a box on top of this, so again I'll use that auto grid option to give me something starting on top of this shape now, and then I'll just set a pretty arbitrary height here, and then I might have rotated this, so I'll just do that. I'm just going to rotate it to a different angle, and I'll move it forward so it's sitting on top, and bring that up. Alright, so then you can see there I've got the height and the width properties and the length. But notice it goes from the centre, and you can obviously line it up at one end, but then lining up the other end can be a bit tricky. So a really good trick there. Have a look at the axis and you'll see it's at the moment just following the axis of the model of the original grid. So X is parallel to the ground, Y is pointing up, or Z is pointing up in the air, and then Y obviously is parallel to the ground as well. If you change it to local, up in this is for your coordinates, then it's going to follow your object, so it's using the local coordinates of the object rather than the grid. So I'm going to hold down Shift and copy this using the Y-axis. So I've copied it along the original axis, so it's kept it at the same angle. And then I'll get the original box, and using compound objects, for Boolean, I'm going to set it to intersection, start picking and choose my second box. So it's essentially giving me an endpoint where the second box finished. So just doing simple things like that, it can save you a lot of time. Otherwise you've got to do several steps to get that object to end up that way. And then you can still convert it afterwards to an editable poly. Because at the moment, it's a pretty complex object. It's got the pro Boolean, and then within that we've got those two boxes. So to change the height or the length of it, I'd have to go and change those boxes separately. But often, once you've got something pretty close to what you want, you can convert it still to an editable poly, and then go in and just work with the vertices and change it that way. Right, so lots of things you can do, and that'd be useful for rafters and all sorts of things on a shape like this. So you can still always work with the individual vertices. And then maybe just to finish up, the clone tool I've been showing you using Shift. You might have realised you've got this option here for the number of copies. And then you've got some different copy options there, copy, instance and reference. Now don't worry too much about reference, but copy and instance are really useful. With instance, it's essentially going to give you something like a block in AutoCAD or a bit like a family in Revit. So I'm going to set the number of copies a bit higher as well, and that's kind of like a quick array. Okay, so I'll do a few copies. And then because I've set instance, now if I go and adjust one, it'll change them all. Okay, whereas if I'd done a copy, I'll just do one more with Shift, and instead I'll set it to copy. And so now it'll change just that one object. It's not linked to the others. Okay, so a very final thing. Tal was just asking before about changing the objects you've imported from Revit, which is a really good point. So say if you've got, well, I'll just get something from Revit. Okay, so you might have modelled something, and I'll just do something really quickly here. So just as a family, I'll model in place a few solids. So let's just, there we go. And then finish that and just make sure it's got a decent height. Maybe I'll make it a bit more interesting than that. Okay, so it might be a platform or something, and 3D, let's just have a look. So actually if it's a platform, I'll just make it a bit lower, so I'll make it, oops, back there. I'll just make it a metre high or something. Okay, so I've got that basic shape in Revit, and again to bring that into Max, I'm going to go back to the view I had before. Suite workflows, 3ds Max Design interior rendering. It's good to remember that if you do, to save that before you link it, because it can sometimes make it crash when you do this. Just run that. Go to active session, choose my file, continue. Now there are a couple of options later on that you'll see we'll look at changing once you start doing your materials. But you can see there, that's brought in the new geometry. But then you might want to go further with that in 3ds Max. So what you'll see is that it's at the moment a linked object. It's over here got editable mesh, and I can't do anything with that. It doesn't even give me the option to convert to something else. And so the trick is, well, there are a couple of options. You can try putting a modifier on it. So if you go onto the menu here, you can go to Edit Poly, and then you get all the same options that you would if it was an editable poly. So you can go to Polygon, choose a surface, extrude it, and scale it and do all those other things. Okay, so that'll work. The only issue with that is if you go too far, the programs will get confused, because you might go back into Revit and change the original shape, and then when you bring it in to max again, if you've done all these editing things to the faces that it had before, it'll sometimes get mixed up about what's happening with the new things. So so sometimes it's better to copy it. Okay, so another way is to clone it when you right click, and then you can go to clone, and then make it a copy. Okay, and then hide the original. So there we are. So I'll just get the shapes there. Oh yeah, anything, absolutely anything. Yep. So they all come as an editable mesh basically, and so then I'll just again isolate selection there with those. I've selected both of them, and if you're wondering which way does a crossing window and which way does a normal window, like in Revit and AutoCAD, it doesn't work the same way. It's essentially set to do a crossing window at first all the time, no matter which way you go. So left or right, right or left, right to left, left to right. It'll always do a crossing window if it's got this option up here set. Click on that button, it'll set it to a window. But I usually just leave it on crossing, it works pretty well. So I can isolate the selection, that's going to have the two objects. And the linked one is the one that doesn't have the plus next to editable mesh. So, and just select when you've got several objects on top of each other. It's not like Revit. In Revit, use tab as the option key when you have several objects in one place. In Max, you just keep clicking. So just keep clicking on the object, it's going to cycle through everything that's there. So I'm just clicking on the same point and it's changing over here to the two different objects. So this is the new one, it's got the plus next to editable mesh. The old one didn't. So I'm going to right click, hide that, so just hide selection. And now it's got just the new one. And so I can convert that to an editable poly. You can see, notice this comes up now, it wasn't there before. Convert to editable poly, and then it's just like any other poly that you can change as much as you want to. So that's the other option. But have a look at Edit Poly, it's a really good modifier. Let's go back. So Edit Poly, you can see there, it's in this modifier list. And it's a good intro to modifiers. You'll see there's a ton of them in Max, which give you all sorts of really good options. But yeah, Edit Poly is a great one to start with. So anyhow, I'll end isolate there, which will take me back to previous view. There we go. And that should do it. So just make sure you've got an idea about how to combine things, and particularly working with union and subtract with your Booleans. So just finish that. Well, get a better view of this. And I'd actually just better point out some of the option keys I was using as well to finish up. F3 is a shortcut that I was using. It doesn't want to work now. It's normally just an automatic option key. It will work, just on mine it's because it's recording, it's not working. But what F3 will do is switch between shaded and wireframe. So that's a really useful option. And then let's go back to shaded. And then another one that works well with that is F4, which turns on edged faces. So you can see these edges here that weren't there before. Okay, so yes, I'll just finish that there, but make sure you've got an idea about those things as well.